My beloved child, something happened today that your soulmate has not been able to stop thinking about, and before you scroll away, listen carefully because this is not about an ordinary moment. There was a conversation, a realization, or a sudden change in their perspective that made them look at your connection differently. They may have appeared calm on the outside, but inside, something shifted. Stay with me for a moment, because the part they want to tell you is not the part they first planned to share. They have been carrying words in their heart, replaying certain memories, wondering whether they should finally speak honestly. And today, something happened that pushed those feelings closer to the surface. They remembered something about you that they had once overlooked. A small gesture. A sentence. A moment when you stayed when you could have walked away. Suddenly, that memory meant something completely different. They realized that what they felt for you was not as temporary as they had convinced themselves. They may have tried to distract themselves, stay busy, or pretend that everything was normal, but today brought the truth back into focus. This may resonate as we continue, because the biggest revelation is not what happened around them. It is what happened inside them. Something huge is waiting for you, and the reason this message feels so urgent is because your soulmate is beginning to understand that silence has been costing them something they cannot replace. What happened today may have started with something surprisingly simple. Perhaps they heard a familiar phrase, saw something that reminded them of you, received an unexpected message, or found themselves in a situation where your name entered their thoughts without warning. But instead of pushing the feeling away like before, they paused. For the first time in a while, they allowed themselves to ask the question they had been avoiding: what if I have been looking at this all wrong? That question changed the emotional direction of their entire day. They started remembering the moments when you made them feel understood without demanding an explanation. They remembered the times your presence brought peace when everything else felt confusing. And then came the realization that surprised even them: they were not simply missing you, they were missing the version of themselves that existed when they felt connected to you. That is a much deeper realization. They may have discovered that moving forward without addressing what happened between you has been harder than they expected. And there is another layer to this. Someone around them may have noticed the change in their mood and asked what was wrong. They did not reveal everything. Instead, they kept part of the truth private because they are still trying to understand it themselves. But the thought they could not escape was this: I need to tell them what happened today. Not because they suddenly have every answer, but because they no longer want their feelings hidden behind silence. The shocking part is that today may have shown them just how much your absence has affected their decisions, their emotions, and even the way they imagine their future. And now we reach the part they may have struggled to admit. There was a moment today when they almost reached out, almost said something, almost opened the door to a conversation they have postponed for far too long. Maybe their fingers hovered over your name. Maybe they started forming a message and then stopped. Maybe they simply sat quietly and imagined what would happen if they finally told you everything. But something held them back. Not because they do not care, but because they are afraid that too much time has passed or that you may no longer feel the same way. This is where their emotional conflict becomes intense. One side of them says, "Say it now." Another side whispers, "What if it changes everything?" And yet, today's experience gave the first side more strength. They realize that waiting does not make difficult feelings disappear. Sometimes waiting only makes them louder. As this unfolds, clarity will come, because the message they want you to understand is not simply, "I missed you." It is closer to, "I finally understand why I could never completely let this go." They may have recognized something about your connection that they previously dismissed as coincidence. A pattern. A timing. A series of moments that kept bringing your memory back into their life. And once they connected those moments, they could no longer pretend the connection meant nothing. This is why today's event matters. It forced them to confront something they had been postponing. They are beginning to understand that if they want a different outcome, they cannot keep repeating the same silence. Somewhere inside them, a decision is forming. It may not happen loudly. It may begin with one honest sentence, one unexpected message, one attempt to reconnect, or one confession they have rehearsed privately many times. But the emotional door is opening. Before this message ends, remember the sentence that started everything: "I need to tell you what happened today." There is a reason those words carry so much weight. Your soulmate may not be ready to explain every detail immediately, but they are reaching a point where hiding the truth from you feels harder than telling it. And what they want you to know is that today's realization did not erase the past, it changed the way they understand it. They are looking back with different eyes. They are noticing things they once ignored. They are recognizing the value of moments they once took for granted. Most importantly, they are beginning to understand that some connections cannot simply be placed in the past because they continue teaching you something long after the conversation ends. So if you have been wondering whether they still think about you, whether they still remember, whether something inside them has changed, pay attention to what comes next. The biggest part of this story may not be what happened today. It may be what today's realization causes them to do tomorrow. Stay with me for a moment, because the next step could reveal whether those feelings remain hidden or finally become words. Your soulmate has a message forming in their heart, and it begins with something they have wanted to say for longer than you realize: "There is something you never knew about what happened between us." And once that sentence is spoken, the entire meaning of their silence may finally become clear. There is one detail your soulmate has been replaying in their mind since today began to change, and it may explain why their heart suddenly feels different. They realize that the thing they kept waiting for was not another sign, another perfect moment, or another reason to stay silent. It was courage to finally acknowledge what they already knew. Something reminded them of you in a way they could not ignore, and instead of quickly moving past it, they allowed themselves to feel everything. They remembered how naturally you understood things they never explained. They remembered a moment when your words stayed with them long after the conversation ended. And then came the realization that hit them unexpectedly: maybe the connection was never as one-sided as they had tried to believe. Maybe both of you were affected more deeply than either person admitted. Stay with me for a moment, because this is where the story becomes more personal. Your soulmate may have started comparing their life before knowing you with their life after meeting you, and the difference surprised them. They noticed that certain choices, certain dreams, and even certain emotions somehow became connected to the memory of you. They may have told themselves that time would make everything ordinary again, but today proved otherwise. The memory did not disappear. It became clearer. And somewhere inside, they admitted something they had been avoiding: I still care more than I ever said. That single realization can change everything, because once someone stops pretending they are unaffected, they can finally decide what they truly want. But there is another part of today's story that your soulmate may not have expected. Someone may have asked them a simple question about their future, their happiness, or the person they truly want beside them. It sounded ordinary, but it touched something deep. They suddenly realized they had been answering that question without saying your name. And for a brief moment, they imagined what it would feel like if you were actually part of the next chapter of their life. That thought brought both warmth and uncertainty. They wondered whether you would still recognize the person they have become. They wondered whether you would listen if they finally explained everything. They wondered whether the distance between you could be replaced by an honest conversation. And then something even more surprising happened. They stopped thinking about what could go wrong and started thinking about what they could finally make right. This is the shift you need to understand. Their energy is moving away from "what if" and toward "what can I do?" As this unfolds, clarity will come. They may not have everything planned, but they are beginning to understand that waiting forever is not a solution. Somewhere in their thoughts, a message has already started forming. It may sound simple, but behind those words is everything they have struggled to express. I need you to understand what happened today, because today made me realize something about us. And the reason they want you to open this message is not simply to make you emotional. It is because the truth they are approaching could change the way you interpret their past silence. If this message is resonating with you, take a moment and share it with someone who may need to hear these words today. And if you have been following this journey, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the next part goes deeper into the one realization your soulmate has been trying to understand. Now listen closely. There is a difference between remembering someone and realizing you are not finished with them. Today may have pushed your soulmate from the first feeling into the second. They may have realized that certain memories still carry emotional weight because something remains unresolved. Maybe they never properly explained why they pulled back. Maybe they never told you what they truly felt during a particular moment. Maybe they acted distant when they were actually overwhelmed by how much the connection meant to them. And today, they finally looked at that contradiction honestly. They asked themselves, why did I hide something that mattered so much? That question opened a door they had kept closed. Behind it were words they never said, apologies they never expressed, gratitude they never showed, and feelings they thought they had successfully buried under time. But those feelings were still there. That is why today felt different. It was not just another day. It became a moment of emotional recognition. They realized that if they continue saying nothing, they may eventually regret not being honest when they had the opportunity. And that thought has stayed with them. So now, something huge is waiting for you, not necessarily in the form of a dramatic announcement, but in the form of a truth finally becoming impossible to ignore. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that what happened today was a turning point in how they see you. They may still be deciding how to approach you, what words to choose, and when to speak, but internally, the conversation has already started. Imagine them sitting quietly, remembering your face, remembering your voice, and thinking about the one sentence they wish they could say without fear or hesitation. It is not complicated. It is not about proving anything. It is simply this: I never stopped caring. I just did not know how to tell you. And perhaps the most surprising part is that today's realization may have made them understand what they truly want from the future. They do not want another unfinished conversation. They do not want more assumptions. They want clarity. They want honesty. They want the chance to explain what was happening inside them when their actions did not match their feelings. This may resonate as we continue, because sometimes the most powerful change begins quietly, inside someone's heart, long before it becomes visible in their actions. And tonight, your soulmate may be closer than ever to turning that private realization into words. The story did not end with what happened today. In many ways, today was the moment that finally made them ready to tell you what they could not say before. Something changed in the way they remembered you today, and that change is more powerful than anything they could have planned. Your soulmate may have spent a long time believing they understood what happened between you, but today exposed a missing piece. A memory suddenly returned with a completely different meaning. They realized that what they once considered a small moment may have actually been the moment their feelings became deeper than they admitted. They remembered your patience, your presence, the way you listened, and perhaps even the things you did without expecting anything in return. And then they asked themselves a question they could no longer avoid: why am I still thinking about this person after all this time? The answer was uncomfortable because it forced them to be honest. They are not simply remembering the past. They are wondering whether the connection still has a future. Stay with me for a moment, because this is where the message becomes much more emotional. Today, they may have experienced something that reminded them how rare genuine understanding can be. Maybe they watched someone struggle with something and suddenly remembered how you used to understand them without needing many words. Maybe they heard a familiar song, saw a familiar place, or came across something connected to a moment you shared. Whatever it was, it opened an emotional door. They tried to close it, but this time they could not. Instead, they sat with the feeling and realized that their heart had been waiting for an honest conversation. Not a perfect conversation. Not a dramatic one. Just an honest one. And that is why the words, "I need to tell you what happened today," feel so important. They are not only describing an event. They are preparing to explain what that event made them realize about you. There is something else they have been keeping to themselves, and this may be the part that surprises you most. Your soulmate has been wondering whether you still think about them too. They may have looked for small signs without admitting it. A familiar name appearing somewhere. A memory unexpectedly returning. A moment when they almost contacted you. They may have wondered whether you would respond warmly or whether too much time has changed everything. And today, instead of focusing only on their uncertainty, they started imagining what would happen if they stopped allowing uncertainty to control them. That was the emotional breakthrough. They realized they cannot know your answer until they are willing to ask the question. They cannot receive clarity while remaining completely silent. They cannot expect the past to explain itself without finally opening the conversation. As this unfolds, clarity will come, because the next realization is connected to something they once misunderstood about you. They may have believed that you moved on easily, that you stopped caring, or that your silence meant you had forgotten them. But today they began questioning that assumption. Perhaps they remembered moments when you tried to communicate and they were not ready to listen. Perhaps they recognized that some of their own choices created distance they later blamed on circumstances. And this realization has made them more reflective than before. They are looking at their own behavior instead of only looking at yours. That is a major shift. It means they are no longer asking, "Why did they do this to me?" They are beginning to ask, "What did I do that contributed to this?" And that question can open the door to a completely different kind of conversation. Now listen carefully, because there is a sentence that may be sitting at the center of everything they are feeling. "I wish I had told you sooner." They may not have spoken those exact words yet, but the feeling behind them is growing stronger. Today showed them that time does not automatically erase unfinished emotions. Sometimes it only teaches you how to hide them better. They may have looked completely fine from the outside, continued with their routine, smiled, worked, talked to people, and acted as though everything was normal. But internally, there was still a question they could not answer. What would have happened if they had been honest at the exact moment they first felt something powerful for you? What if they had trusted their heart instead of overthinking everything? What if they had told you what they really needed instead of expecting you to understand silence? Those questions may have followed them throughout the day. And the surprising part is that they are no longer using those questions only to revisit the past. They are using them to imagine what they can do differently now. This may resonate as we continue, because sometimes a person does not realize the value of a connection until they imagine what life would feel like without the possibility of returning to it. Today may have brought that possibility directly into their thoughts. They suddenly realized that if they truly want to know where they stand with you, they cannot keep guessing forever. Something has to be said. Something has to be clarified. Something has to finally come out into the open. And now we arrive at the part your soulmate has been approaching all day without realizing it. The event itself may have seemed ordinary to everyone else, but for them, it became deeply personal. It reminded them of what they want, what they regret, and what they have been afraid to admit. They may have imagined sitting across from you and telling you everything without pretending to be stronger than they feel. They may have imagined saying, "You deserved more honesty from me." They may have imagined explaining why they became distant, why they hesitated, why they sometimes acted as though they did not care when their heart was telling them the opposite. And perhaps the most emotional realization of all is that they do not want you to misunderstand their silence forever. They want you to know that silence did not always mean indifference. Sometimes it meant confusion. Sometimes it meant fear of saying the wrong thing. Sometimes it meant they were trying to understand feelings they had never experienced in that way before. But today, something became clearer. They realized that if they keep protecting themselves from an uncomfortable conversation, they may also be protecting themselves from something meaningful. Something huge is waiting for you, and it may begin with one simple act of honesty. Your soulmate is not necessarily preparing a perfect speech. They are preparing themselves to finally stop hiding behind uncertainty. And when they eventually tell you what happened today, you may discover that the real story was never about the event itself. It was about what that event revealed. They still carry a place for you in their heart, and they are finally beginning to understand why.